Hey there, this is Don, and this is a bonus lesson to my Space Train Station Skillshare class. I want to show you a great resource for getting free 3D models and assets to use in your project. And this is it right here. It's called 3D Warehouse, and it's a collection of possibly millions of various 3D models which you can open in Cinema 4D. So let's search for some of the models we had in the class. One of the items which was part of the train station was a layout of benches. So I just went over to 3D Warehouse and searched for bench. And then on the products page, there was actually a lot of very good options. Also, you could go to models. This is a new tab right here. But if you go to models, you can search in there as well. Same thing. And I'm going to find the exact model that I used in the class. And this is it right here. The 426 series bench. I can go ahead and download this. Now, I happen to have SketchUp 2019 installed currently, but actually you don't even need it. But just in case I wanted to also open this in SketchUp, I'm going to download that version and just click OK here. Another example I'm going to just show here is the vending machine we used in the train station as well. So if I search for that under models, this is the version I downloaded. So you can either download directly from here, or you can click on the item and it's going to take you to this bigger page. And you can even see how many times this has been viewed or downloaded. So this particular model has been downloaded 20,000 times, which is quite a lot. The last thing I wanted to get was also a train to use in the project, and this is what I found. So let's go to the actual page as well. And that's it. I downloaded this one too. And this is what those files look like on my hard drive. Let's start with the bench. I'm going to simply drag and drop this into Cinema 4D. And Cinema 4D is going to import this without any issues. This is certainly the case in version 23 of Cinema 4D. I think it was in 22 and 21, and possibly beyond that as well. But definitely in 23, you can open SketchUp files directly. But right now we can't see anything. So let's see what's going on. I'm going to click on the object and hit S to try and frame it into the viewport. But that didn't work. So maybe we can open this up and just see what this bench is made up of. So we can see the seats, the armrests, and the support. If I click the support, I should be able to frame that. So if I hit S, but once again, not a whole lot of luck. Okay, this is the kind of thing which can happen when you open these assets. Because they were not originally made in Cinema 4D, they may not always display correctly the first time, but Cinema 4D tries its best, and usually it works. But here we have a slightly challenging situation, so I'm going to select all the different null objects part of this object list. Then I am going to right click and delete without children. And when you use that function, it deletes only what you have selected and leaves behind any other nested objects, such as these here. I can tell the issue here is that the anchor points to these various pieces of geometry are all over the place. So we can see a few down there, and one of them is up here. We need them to be actually in the center of the different pieces of geometry. So if I go to Mesh, Axis, and Axis Center, we can execute, and now we can see the bench is actually somewhere up here when all those anchor points move to the correct place. And there we go. Now we have our bench in Cinema 4D. Let's quickly just look through the geometry. So this is the support. So this is labeled nicely. And you can also tell what's what just by looking at the material which is applied, and any light gray materials, that's clearly this seating area. And the darker gray material is for these armrests and legs. Anyway, we are going to simply drag everything into the support. Let's call this our bench. And now this is going to move as a single object. There is a polygon here, which I believe is a label somewhere on this bench. We don't need this, we can delete it, which is going to leave behind some unused materials. Now, only two are being used here, the gray and the darker gray material. So let's right click and delete unused materials to just leave those two behind. So now we have cleaned up both the geometry and the materials. We also want to put this anchor point at the base of this object. So let's go to Mesh, Axis, Center once again. And the Y I'm going to drop down to -100, so when I hit execute, it's going to jump to the base of the bench. This means that if I were to throw this into something like a cloner, hold the Alt key as I do this to automatically make the cloner a parent, you can see it's going to get cloned from that point at the base. Something else we should always do is to make sure this project is using the default scale in Cinema 4D and that the object itself is to scale. So if I take the bench out of here, let's delete the cloner. If I bring in a cube, we can see this cube is 508 centimeters by default. Now the default cube size in Cinema 4D should be 2 meters. So for whatever reason, that aspect of this particular model hasn't translated correctly into Cinema 4D. So we can just copy this and then create a new project and then paste it here. So that's using Control-C and Control-V. Now, if I get a cube, you can see we have the default correct scale. And it seems the bench itself is already to scale. I mean, if I click on it, let's move it to 0 in X position and 0 in Z. And if I want to find out the overall size of this whole thing, I can click on the bench and under size, let's go to size plus. What this does is it looks at the total size of all the pieces of geometry inside of this object. And right now we can see it's 171 centimeters wide, about 85 centimeters tall, and 68 centimeters deep. And those are actually the kind of dimensions you would expect to get for something like this. If not, you can press T and scale this up to the desired size. The reason we care so much about scale is that when we drop this into our main scene, it has to look like it belongs there. Otherwise, it won't look very convincing if it's too small or too large. So we can go back to our normal scale mode, or rather its size actually. And the final thing I would do here is go to layers, create a new layer. Let's call this bench. And in it, I'm going to drag our bench, the geometry, as well as the materials. This is going to create a tab in the materials section with just those two materials, and it's labeled bench, which means if we have multiple objects in a scene, we can continue to stay as organized as possible because each of them is going to have its own separate tabs for its materials. Anyway, we can save this one. Let's just call it our bench. You can see I did this before when I was doing a quick test. Anyway, I can overwrite the old file. Here is a more challenging example. The train, if I bring that in, it's a bit of a lottery with the models you download from SketchUp. Sometimes, it's simple enough and gets imported in a way that makes, some sense. But sometimes this kind of thing can happen where there's just too many materials, a lot of duplicates, and also a ton of objects over here. So we have to do a lot of cleaning up with models like this. I'm going to start by getting rid of one of them. We don't need two. They're the same thing. Then to remove the duplicated materials, I'm going to select all of them except for one. and then right click, select tags, and then replace them with the one I didn't select. And I just have to repeat this every time there's a set of duplicated materials. In this case though, those textures, this first set of textures, this is actually just for various signs and labels on this particular train, such as like the subway map on the inside. But I don't really want any of that detail, so I'm going to select all of them. And let's right click, select the tags and material objects, and I'm just going to press delete to get rid of them because I don't actually care too much about those details. Really, for the most part, I was just interested in the outer shell of this train model. I'm going to identify what I think should be the main material. So it's this gray color. If I click anywhere in the geometry, I can see that it's this one right here. If we bring it to the front, let's call it main. And then a secondary color is going to be this darker gray. And that's the roof material. So if I call that main 2. So all these other colors like the red and yellow, I'm going to replace them with those 2 materials. So the doors, the red and yellow, let's select the tags, replace them with our main material. And the black part, if I just click, I want to identify that material. It seems to be this one. So select that once again and then replace it with our secondary color. There's a few leftover black spots. And clicking around, it's either this one or this one, or I guess both. Replace them with the gray material again. These 2 materials are the same. So if we replace the first one with the second, that's for some of the interior details. Now it means I am losing control of different parts of the train in terms of being able to have 2 different materials for them. But as I already said, that's because I really only care about the outside detail. So I didn't really need to be able to control the color of all of these things on the inside. In fact, what I did for the actual project was I got rid of all of the detail that was on the inside. And one of the good things about this model is that everything is labeled quite nicely, so it was easy to identify what each of those things were. There was just a ton of objects over here, that's all. That was the issue. When SketchUp imported this in, it just splits everything into several different things when a lot of them should have been combined. But at least they're named correctly. So for example, if I search for bench, it's going to bring up all of these objects, which I can select by holding Shift, get the first one and then go to the last one, and then just delete. And that clears out the inside of the train. We have some lights up here, and from memory, I think these were called lamp. And we can delete that too. So depending on your situation, you may want to carry on doing that kind of cleanup. It's going to be a bit of a lottery with the models you get from SketchUp. Some of them may have good geometry that's easy to work with, simplified materials and so on. But I think a lot of the time you will have to deal with just doing some manual cleanup. I'm just trying to get rid of this detail under here. I think it's a bit too simple. So just clean that up. Okay, but you get the idea and the process. It just can be a bit tedious. Something else to look out for are these splines, which may be important, but they're not doing anything. So let's search for this particular one. It's called standalone edges. So if I search for that, here is every instance of that. There's 101 of these, so let's get rid of all of them. I think my materials could be even simpler. A lot of them just really look the same. So all of these whitish gray materials, if I pick every single one, replace them with our main material, it just means we have less things to deal with. This gray is clearly the same again. Let's replace it with our main darker gray material. The windows, if we go back to the final example, they were illuminated like this instead of being see-through. So if I find that material, by clicking any of the windows, I can see the translucent material is highlighted. Let's go to that and enable luminance and make it this pale orange color. Now it's done that to the lights, which should be a different thing. Let's open this and call it Windows, and then make a copy. Call it lights. Now I can't just drag and drop this because it's a whole object. So there was some selection tags on this clearly. If I click the object and try to find it in the list, press S to jump to it, it's inside of these two face groups, and that's for the front face. And inside of that, it's nested inside the headlights. So this model is actually labeled very well, which is very useful. We lost that material when we went into solo mode. It wasn't applied to anything, so let me just do that again. Select these tags and replace them with that material. Do the same for the other side, and it's the headlights. This sign, I want to change the color, so it's clearly this white. I'm going to make that the main color. And I can jump out of here, and that's the front of the train. So the train ought to be in the center of the scene. However, it's just kind of floating up here. So if I select this, and let's just zero out the position first of all, it's still not in the center the way we want it to be. So let's click on that object, go to Mesh, Axis and Axis, Center. If I hit execute, nothing is going to happen. That's because this is not actual geometry that I have selected. It's a null object. So we have to include the children, and we also have to include all the objects. And now when I execute, it's going to take into account all of the geometry that make up this entire thing. So that's better, and we can move it to the center this time. Now it's below the floor, so what I'm going to do is let's go to one of the views. I'm going to go to the right side view, and if I get axis modification, I can drag the anchor point to somewhere at the base in line with where the wheels come up to, so roughly about there or so, and then exit the axis modification. Now I can zero out the Y position, and it's going to be sitting on the floor once again. And let's call this train. In layers, we already have one. Let's rename it to train also, and put our materials into there. So from here, this train object is something I could use in various projects as an asset, just like we did here in this project. One other thing I want to deal with here is the shading that's happening on these lines. It seems something is a bit off there, and it's to do with the font tag. So if I select one of those panels and solo it, okay, that got rid of it. Let's select one of the actual lines, and then go to the font tag. This should be a lower angle, like 10 or something. And you see now the shading is correct. So compare this part to the rest of these stripes. So if we can find what that object is called, and then just search for that, we can find all of those font tags and put them to about 10 degrees. It seems I still missed these, so what's going on there? Okay, I found them. And there we go. The font tag is a way to smooth out curved edges, but these are meant to be sharp like this. So if you put too high of an angle on the font tag, on straight edges like that, it messes with the shading. So that's why we should be careful with that. Here is something else you could do to optimize this even further. If there are some objects which could clearly just be combined into a single thing, such as this area underneath the train. So if I select any one of these, press S to find it, it's in this object called the metro bogie. Now, I don't know what that means exactly. And if I move it, you can see it's a single object. So this is one of them, and there's two, and it's just right there. So if I get both of these and solo, we can take this one, place this inside of a connect object. Okay, so both are actually going to be a child of this connect, and we don't want to weld these together, we're just connecting them. Textures should be ticked, so we keep our materials. And now if I hit C on this, it's going to make this into a single object, because we've now made it editable. We've baked it down. So if I unsolo, it's going to bring it back, and there it is. Now this is going to move as a single object. So that's optional, really. You could do this further for all these other parts, such as the windows, the side panels, and so on. And that's actually what I did in the final example, which I included in the class files. This version here, you can see it's similar, but this one is just a bit more optimized because I went through all the various different objects and connected all the things that I could, just so I could simplify the number of objects in the object list. But visually, but that's optional depending on how much time you want to spend, because visually from the outside, it's going to look fine whether it's crunched down like this, or if you don't want to do that optimization and just have a whole bunch of objects as well. Anyway, now you guys know how to deal with some models from 3D Warehouse. As I mentioned earlier, you may not have to do this much work most of the time, depending on what model you downloaded and how the original was created. But I think usually there's always going to be a bit of work to do. Anyway, that's it.